Ryan McBeth is a U.S. Army veteran. He is also open intelligence sources analyst or SINT analyst. Welcome to the program, Ryan.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I would like to start with Ukraine's offensive inside Russia. With this development, there are lots of discussions on this issue in Ukraine and I believe in the United States too. What is your take on this development and what do Americans think about this?
I can tell you that the development was pretty darn surprising. It seems to me that Ukraine is attacking where the landmines are not, meaning since most of the south and east has so many landmines, so many defenses, Ukraine made a conscious decision to essentially go around them and cause damage to the adversary by going around them and attacking weaker points. The one thing that I've noticed in the United States, at least among the military community, is people who were former Stryker infantry. Stryker is that 8-wheeled armored personnel carrier that was donated to Ukraine. People who are in the American Army who are former Stryker infantry are as happy as, are extremely happy right now because the Stryker is actually being used for what it was intended to be used for, and that was exploit a breakthrough and wreak havoc among the enemy's rear lines. So it seems like the mood here in the U.S. is pretty good, especially if you're former Stryker infantry.
What is your take on this U.S.-made equipment which is used for Ukraine's offensive inside Russia? What are its chances against Russia's equipment there in the Kursk region?
So usually it's the better crewman. Right? It's not necessarily the better piece of equipment. The better piece of equipment helps. Usually it's the more highly motivated, the better trained crewman that tends to win the fight, although luck also plays a role. One advantage of a lot of Western equipment is that it is more survivable, meaning that if that vehicle gets hit with an enemy round, there's a better chance of the crew living to fight another day, or even having that vehicle repaired. So that's kind of the deal there. It's not just the equipment. Equipment is great. It is equipment combined with the fighting spirit of the Ukrainian soldier that makes this equipment so good.
From your perspective, what would Ukraine need now from the United States in terms of security assistance, especially for offensive purposes?
They would probably need, obviously, more anti-tank missiles, more Strykers. They've already shown they can use these things really well. And if the United States could reduce any kind of prohibition on exporting F-16s, we have plenty of F-16s sitting in the boneyard in, I believe it's Arizona, which is this, Arizona or Nevada, essentially sitting in the American desert. We can repair these F-16s, we can get them over to Ukraine, and we can give them more than just the F-16s that have been promised by the Danish governments and the Netherlands. We've already proven, the Ukraine has proven they can use this weapon platform. Getting more F-16s over to Ukraine would be essential to allowing them to finish the fight.
I would like also to cover U.S. administration reaction towards this offensive inside Russia. It seems like there are not any kind of objections. What is your personal opinion on this?
Do you mean objections in America on the offensive or objections from Russia?
Yeah.
Because it seems like you don't
From
see
America,
a lot coming out of Russia either.
Sure, yeah, I'm talking especially about the U.S. administration.
You know, America loves a winner. America loves a winner. And I think that one of the things that Americans understand is they understand audacity. Audacity being the desire to do something that's so bold that it just shocks your enemy. And I think that most Americans see that and they go, wow, they are fighting back. And you know, there is a culture in this country that goes all the way back to 1776 when America fought the British. And it's one of the reasons so many Americans have guns. We all believe that one day, if we have to, we're going to cast away tyranny. And so that plays in the mindset of the average American, this idea of fighting tyranny. And I think they see Ukraine doing that. And it would almost be like the United States invading England back in 1776 and taking the fight to the enemy. So we see that, and I think most Americans are appreciative of Ukraine's audacity.
I would like also to cover escalation fears. Do you feel that the United States has been played by Russia on this escalation threats, nuclear threats? Vladimir Putin has not used nuclear weapons despite the fact that Ukraine invaded Russia.
So escalation is it's a very loaded term, mainly because Russia doesn't need an excuse to escalate. They just kind of do that naturally. It's not like they're going to go, wow, we need to bomb Ukraine harder. They're already doing that. So escalation is mainly used as a way to discourage the West from sending aid or supporting Ukraine. And the fact is that nuclear weapons really aren't that useful on the battlefield, at least in the current operational conditions. A nuclear weapon would be a useful way of destroying an amphibious ready group or an aircraft carrier. Ukraine doesn't really have a navy. Amphibious or nuclear weapons would be good for striking deep underground bunkers. Ukraine really doesn't have any of those command and control centers like America has with NORAD or like Taiwan has. Now, nuclear weapons could be used to stop an advance or halt a breakthrough, but one of the issues is that Ukraine is moving so darn fast that they would be able to go around that particular nuclear weapon or that particular crater. And also, if you could use a nuclear weapon to counterattack and detonate one of your enemy lines and rush your forces through, but with what forces is Russia doing this? So you can talk about escalation all you want, but from a practical level, a nuclear weapon really wouldn't be all that useful. And you also have to take a look at China. I would not be surprised if China has said to Russia, do not use a nuclear weapon, because the second you do that, it's going to be a lot easier for America to use a nuclear weapon on Chinese forces if they invade Taiwan. And that is a use case, destroying an amphibious ready group, destroying aircraft carriers, destroying ships. China does not want Pandora's nuclear box opened in Ukraine because they do not want nuclear weapons used in Russia. They do not want nuclear weapons used against them in Taiwan.
From your perspective, why did Biden administration even buy this Putin's threats and his bluff, his nuclear bluff, and why did Americans buy this nuclear bluff?
Well, there are a lot of people who make money through selling fear. And most Americans don't understand the use cases for nuclear weapons, or when they think of a nuclear weapon, they think of movies where entire cities are getting destroyed. And it's a very easy path to say, what if Russia goes nuclear? Because most people don't ask the next question, which is, well, what does that look like? Right? And I could see Russia using a nuclear weapon somewhere in the Donbass to cause an explosion and then break through that one area where people were defending. But how can Russia do that when they don't have enough troops to actually exploit the breakthrough? So they're going to throw away their nuclear card on an operation which they can't sustain. Now, I know that, but the average person doesn't know. And there is money to be made from scaring people and saying, what if Russia uses a nuclear weapon, without answering the second question of why and how.
But who is making money on this?
Well, this would be a lot of online influencers or people who write articles, people who are edgelords that that support Russia because it's kind of edgy to do that. They get these fake internet points, and the fact is that people on Twitter or people on YouTube, they make money. They sell eyeballs,
Like
right? They sell
clickbait, yeah.
ads against fear mongering. And you see this on, there was a TV show called Breaking Points, which is an alternative news publication, which I've gone after before for publishing fake news. They do this all the time, where they talk about Russia and nuclear weapons as if they know what they're talking about. And you know what? When you say nuclear, that kind of triggers that fear in someone's brain, and they want to watch and find out what could happen because of some morbid curiosity.
But after Ukraine's offensive inside Russia, do you feel that this fear of escalation is still alive in the United States and in other Western countries?
I don't. I don't know about other Western countries, but I know in the United States, I think we all took a look at it and we went, you know what? Nothing happened. Yeah, we sent HIMARS to Ukraine. There was no nuclear war. We sent ATACMS to Ukraine. There was no nuclear war. We sent F-16. Well, we didn't send F-16s. We approved the transfer of F-16s. There was no nuclear war. Ukraine invaded Russian soil for the first time in 70 years. This is the first time Ukraine has invaded anybody, right?
Sure, yeah.
And there was no nuclear war. I think that the whole nuclear war thing might just be a card that is played by Russia when they want to get their way, and they have no intention of using nuclear weapons because, number one, China doesn't want them to, and number two, the second they use a nuclear weapon, they have to back that up in some way, and they just don't have the troops to exploit the kind of operations that a nuclear weapon would allow them to exploit.
How do you see Russia's reaction to Ukraine's offensive inside Russia? It seems like there were pretty much chaos and disorganization there. And from your perspective, how do you see Vladimir Putin right now? What could he think about?
Well, I think what they might be thinking is that they might be viewing this particular incursion as not that big of a deal. Russia's pretty big, and I believe Ukraine has maybe captured the amount of territory equivalent to the American state of Rhode Island. Not that much territory. So I believe what Russia is doing is that they're displaying a level of discipline to an extent where they're not going to let this particular incursion take their focus off the South, because I believe Russia goes, you know what? There's not a lot of damage they can do in the big scheme of things. Yeah, they might be able to cut a rail line, but we have another rail line that can help that. I think it was, I can't remember the darn name of the town, but there's two rail lines that go down to this one particular town. I want to say it was Berdansk, but I might be incorrect about that. So there's two rail lines that go down to this one particular town. Ukraine was able to cut one of them. That puts a lot of pressure on a second rail line, but it's not the end of the world. Russia can still supply their troops there. So I think Russia might be looking at this from the standpoint of, you never want your adversary to dictate to you what you should do. You should be having your adversary react to what you're doing. And I think if Russia actually responds to this, then they might be falling into whatever trap the Ukrainians have set, because a lot of people have looked at this particular incursion and they've gone, well, we don't know what Ukraine is doing. Are they going after an objective? Is it the city of Kursk? Is it the nuclear power plant? Or is it rail lines? What are they doing there? And what Ukraine might be doing is they might be performing what's called a feint, meaning they're attacking in one place, and then once Russia responds, they're going to attack another place. And so what Russia might be doing is just not responding because they're waiting for that second attack to happen. So that's kind of number one. And the second possibility is that Ukraine might have done this to force a general mobilization. Back in 2022, there was this deal between the Russian people and President Putin, at least the Russian people who lived in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. Do whatever you want, but don't take our kids. And that's why the war, the initial invasion of Ukraine was fought with kontraktniki, right? So when Russia had a general mobilization in, I think it was September of 2022, the people in the elites in St. Petersburg and Moscow went, whoa, you're taking our kids. And that's when you saw Wagner. That's when you saw the amount of money being released for volunteers, for prisoners to get out of prison and fight. You saw that amount of money go up. And what this could be is a way for Ukraine to force a general mobilization. So if Russia doesn't respond to the incursion, then hopefully it kind of peters out if Ukraine can't sustain those logistical lines. And then they don't have to respond by increasing the size of the army, which would require conscription, which would make everybody in St. Petersburg and Moscow mad, which could trigger a coup against Putin.
And I would like also to cover, you said about coup against Vladimir Putin. Do you feel that he's so afraid of this full-scale mobilization that he would not do that? Because Bloomberg reported that Russia could conduct another mobilization until the end of this year. However, there are concerns that Russian people would not like this decision. Do you feel that Putin does not have an exit from this situation?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure there is a good response here. You know, in business, one of the options is always to do nothing. And if Ukraine is expecting Russia to do something and Russia doesn't fall into that trap, then it actually makes sense to do nothing and allow Ukraine to keep this territory. Now it's their problem to defend, right? So I think that almost by responding to this, it could place President Putin into a worse position. So the idea is just don't respond to it or contain it with a minimum number of troops. And yeah, there is enough Russian control of the media that they might be able to spin this narrative. But as of right now, by not responding to it, President Putin actually puts himself in a better situation than he would by responding to it.
It seems like also there are some critical statements even on Russia's state media regarding Vladimir Putin's war effort and his strategy on Ukraine. Is there a chance that this criticism could rise and would be really strong towards Putin? This criticism could lead even to the regime change from your perspective.
That's more of a geopolitical question. I tend to do better with specific weapons. But in a case like this, I don't know if being embarrassed would necessarily put President Putin in a situation like that. He was embarrassed when Wagner did their 200-mile convoy, to Moscow that eventually turned around. It seems like he is able to survive embarrassment. He is able to survive minor criticism. But what he wouldn't be able to survive is a general mobilization that took kids from the wealthy to go and fight. That might be a little beyond the pale, and he would lose a lot of support. But I think he can survive a little bit of criticism, people saying he isn't fighting hard enough.
But if Ukraine moves forward and moves forward into the even more deep into the Russian territory in the Kursk region, can he really survive such blow to his reputation and the reputation of his military?
That's a very good question. If Ukraine captures a major city like Kursk proper, or they capture a nuclear power plant, I believe that power plant supplies 50% of the electricity to Ukraine's steel industry. I might be incorrect about that. I'm trying to do this from memory. That might be a little bit harder to get away from if all of a sudden your people are in the dark and you can't actually build tanks anymore because you don't have enough steel production. That could be an issue. Capturing Kursk proper, the actual city, might be a little too far. And one of the things Russia might not want to see is an actual battle in Kursk, which destroys buildings and leaves a significant population homeless. You talk about the chickens coming home to roost. Russia did that plenty in Ukraine. They might not necessarily want to see that on their soil. So if Ukraine gets as far as Kursk proper or the nuclear power plant, I could see that becoming an issue, but Russia might find enough forces to strike back before that actually happens.
Also, The Economist reported that Ukraine has not informed the United States about this offensive inside Russia because two previous operations which have been prepared by Ukraine were undermined after Ukraine informed the United States about the details of those two operations. First operation Ukraine has been warned against the first operation, and second operation was leaked to the Russian side. Do you feel that there could be some problems with security of information in this communication between Ukraine and the United States?
Well, there always is. And any time you put out some sort of signal, you stand a chance of that signal being intercepted. And you also stand the chance of cowards in the American administration leaking this to people because they might not want Ukraine to necessarily win. They might want Ukraine to stay in a stalemate with Russia, at least until after the election. Americans hate surprises between September and October of election years. So I could easily see someone in the current administration leaking information like this, hey, there's going to be a big attack, just because they don't want any surprises. But one of the things that Ukraine is really good at, I am so surprised, their operational security, they were able to keep this operation secret to an absurd degree. I had never seen anything like this before. I believe 2 brigades of troops, I believe they hid them in Sumy, essentially under parking garages, and then sent them to the front lines. What they did was incredible. I think this particular operation is going to be studied at military schools like West Point and Sandhurst for the next 50 years. It was really that good, and that level of operational security was incredible.
Why haven't we seen any kind of resistance from Russian people in Kursk region towards to Ukraine's offensive inside Russia? It's an interesting question, isn't it?
It is an interesting question, and I know that Russia does have civilian ownership of firearms. You are allowed to own a gun if you're a citizen, but the only thing I can think of is that it could be that all the military-aged men who would act as a resistance, they might already be drafted. And that doesn't mean that women can't fight. Women can certainly fight as partisans, but they haven't chosen to do so. And so I can think of kind of 2 reasons. The first is that there might not be enough civilian firearms for them to mount an effective resistance. Russia is not like Ukraine. Ukraine is a free people, and you can usually trust free people with arms. And when Russia invaded Ukraine, they were giving out AKs left and right. There are people Googling how to use an AK, right? They don't even know how to load this thing. But Ukraine trusted a free people enough to give them weapons and say, go fight. And you haven't really seen this in Russia. And I can think that, number one, there might not be enough civilian firearms to mount an effective resistance. Number 2, there might not be enough young men to mount an effective resistance. The third option is that Russia might be reluctant to just park a truck in Kursk and give out weapons because they would prefer their people to be licensed and know everyone who has a gun, right? And they don't want to necessarily give out guns because they don't trust their people. And the fourth reason might be that maybe to some Russians, politics is something that happens to them, not something they actually participate in as a people. And if you're just going from day to day trying to survive, then it becomes really, really difficult to want to shoot at the Ukrainians who come into your neighborhood and bring you food to make sure that you're okay, which we've seen happen. So it could be a combination of all 4 of those things, but especially the part where Ukraine has treated people inside these captured territories pretty darn well. And normally insurgencies happen when you don't treat the population well. And so I think that is definitely a show of professionalism among the Ukrainian armed forces that when they've rolled into these neighborhoods, you haven't seen them looting, you haven't seen them taking washing machines, and they're handing out food to babushkas who need it.
Oh, there was even a joke about washing machines that Ukrainian army did not take it, and that's why they had such opportunity to move so fast, because they did not take washing machines from those people in Kursk region. And it's really interesting that some people, we have seen some footage, some people were welcoming Ukrainian armed forces and even were happy about this incursion because of the hate and the hate of Vladimir Putin. What could it say us about this operation, and do you feel that it could be a sign of Putin's ratings going down?
I'm not sure if it could mean that the public opinion has gone down, because as horrible as it is to say, those people don't matter, right? The people who matter are in Moscow and St. Petersburg. So if those particular residents of Kursk Oblast are happy that the Ukrainians are there because at least there might be some stability in the region and they might not have to worry about having their sons conscripted into the Russian army, I mean, that's great, but at the end of the day, the people who really matter are the elites in St. Petersburg and Moscow who have not seen the effects of this war personally.
Do you feel that they could change their mind, those elites in Moscow and St. Petersburg? Do you feel that they are seeing that all things they are not going well, nor they are not going according to any plan? Maybe only according to Ukrainian plan, yeah.
That their minds could change if it stops going well for them. And don't forget, when you look at a country like Vietnam, when the United States kind of pulled out of Vietnam in 1973, the South Vietnamese government kind of went along for a couple more years, 2 more years before the government entirely collapsed. And if you are an elite in South Vietnam and there are some border areas that are getting taken over, you might not necessarily be that concerned because that's so far away from you. So until the elites in Moscow and St. Petersburg feel this personally, they might not feel very connected to this particular event.
And my last question would be about what are your top 5 myths and disinformations about the war in Ukraine? What are the top 5 most misleading and disinformational pieces of news you have ever seen about the war in Ukraine? Maybe also about what are the Russia's disinformation one?
Oh boy, top 5. There's so many. Probably the biggest piece of misinformation that keeps getting passed around is harvesting organs, that Ukraine is harvesting organs from prisoners on the battlefield or dying Ukrainian soldiers. Harvesting an organ takes an enormous amount of medical effort. You need to have an anesthesiologist there who keeps the patient alive. And it's tough to do even in a hospital under controlled conditions. So probably number 1 would be the harvesting of organs from wounded soldiers or even wounded civilians or the dead. You can't really harvest an organ from a dead body either. The blood needs to be flowing. It needs to have oxygen in it. Probably the second biggest piece of information or of misinformation is that Russia is going to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine if Ukraine crosses this line or crosses that line or crosses whatever line. That's a pretty darn big piece of misinformation right there. I think the third is that Ukraine morale is low. I'm sure morale is low in some pockets, but we are talking about a people that filled up Molotov cocktails and put them at bus stations. This is a people who are never going to accept Russian rule. They do not want to be slaves. And when you have a people who are filling Molotov cocktails and keeping boxes of these things at bus stations to throw at Russian tanks, if Russian tanks enter Kyiv, that is a totally different mentality. And that's not a mentality that we saw in Russia. Nobody's filling up Molotov cocktails to throw at the Ukrainians. Probably if there's a fourth item, that fourth item might be that President Zelensky is corrupt. There's corruption in Ukraine, and there's corruption in America as well. You know, but the one story that constantly gets passed around is look at all of Zelensky's mansions, look at all of his yachts, look, his wife just bought a $4.5 million car. The corruption levels of Ukraine are taken to an extreme by Russian propaganda, and probably the fifth most dangerous piece of disinformation that's issued by Russia is that if NATO gets involved, there will be World War III. And the truth is that Russia wants to force Westerners to think that there could be World War III that could involve NATO and Russia. And the fact is that Russia does not want NATO to become involved in this conflict, because the second NATO does, this operation will be over in 6 weeks. It will look like what we saw during the fall of Iraq, where we pushed in and that government toppled within 6 weeks. Russia is yet to fight against a modern army with significant air power. Ukraine's army is pretty darn modern, but they don't have the air power to kind of back it up. And Russia would be on the ropes within days once they came under that level of air, of sustained 24-hour constant air attack. That would be a big problem for them. So that would probably be the fifth one, is this myth that there's going to be some kind of tripwire that NATO gets involved and all of a sudden there's a nuclear war that destroys the world. Russia does not want NATO to get involved because they will be defeated.
Thank you, Ryan, for taking part in our interview, for your time, and glory to Ukraine.
Well, thank you so much. It was great to be here.